state resources to undermine the federal law, that's a different thing, and we can talk about what it looks like for state resources to be used to resist federal law, whether that is resisting integration of schools or whether it is protecting medical marijuana patients who are being prosecuted under the federal law. But I just want us to be clear that when we're talking about asserting state sovereignty, we are talking about asserting the state's ability to control what is within the state's sphere. And I think we do need to acknowledge that there is another sphere, and we can exert some pressure on that. We can withdraw our state resources from enforcing those federal laws, whether it be federal immigration laws. We don't have to be a part of rounding up people who are suspected of immigration violations, or whether it's drug laws. We don't have to be a part of rounding up people who have violated federal drug laws. We do have some way to withhold the state's resources, but to say that enforcing the state law is going to restrict enforcement of the federal law, I don't think is quite correct.
Well, what she's talking about, you can look at it like different levels of resistance, like going back to the Alien Sedition Acts. The first thing I said is, we'll first declare that be null and void from inception and non-enforceable. So you brand it as illegitimate is the first step. And a lot of towns and counties did that in reaction to the Patriot Act. They said this is, the notion that you can compel a librarian to disclose her list of customers and that she can't talk about it or you're going to arrest her. And a lot of towns and counties in this country said that's illegitimate. That's the first thing, is a condemnation. You brand it unconstitutional. And that has a lot of political perspective of utilization, right? Then you can get potentially Revolution 1800 or some other turning over in the political realm. The next level, though, is withdrawal, like she said, withdrawal of support. Why did Montana sheriffs and Highway Patrol and everybody else help the feds when they came in here and violated the rights of the Montanans? They could have just withheld their support and their aid. That's the next step. It's a very peaceful way of doing it. Then what you're talking about is ratcheting up beyond that to civil disobedience and then potentially like arresting them and things like that. So there's like different levels of resistance.
And I want to remind everyone that the Supremacy Clause applies only to one kind of state official, and that's to the judge. So law enforcement officials, legislators, the governor, the attorney general, none of them are necessarily bound by federal law. So you had a question, sir?
Thank you very much. I'm not qualified to be in this discussion, but
Yes, you are.
I would like the perspective of a perception is needed here. The founders spoke of unalienable rights, inalienable rights. From that, they moved to the 10th Amendment, which says not reserved to the states and the people, but to the states or to the people. There's a big difference between the word and or. Or implies that the ultimate authority or legitimacy for any governing activity arises from the people who enter this world in possession of rights which come from a higher source than any man-made government. So I think that perspective will help us understand state rights versus federal rights. Thank you very much.
Stewart, could you go into, just in reference to that gentleman's comment, there's a recent case about, I believe it was in Colorado, where a sheriff's department countered the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management.
I'm not familiar with that, but I'm familiar with a case in Colorado where a sheriff said, I'm not going to use my resources to enforce silly laws against marijuana, state or federal. He uses discretion. Police officers have discretion. They don't have to arrest you. They can use their discretion to not arrest you. And the same goes for a sheriff, whether they want to support the feds or not. It's about enough of the case you're talking about. I think there was a case in Nevada where you had, there was a cattle seizure was threatened of a rancher, and BLM essentially, the sheriff came down and said, oh, you're not going to take his cattle. And they said, well, we're going to come back with our SWAT team. And he said, okay, I'll meet you back here with my SWAT team. That's what the sheriff said. And then they never came back. So that's hardball. That's way up there on your list of things to do. I think it's much better for a sheriff to have the backing of the state legislature and a law signed by the governor that says, for example, against NDAA, in this state, this is unconstitutional. We consider this to be a gross violation of everything our Constitution is meant to preserve, and we will criminalize it in our state. This will be considered kidnapping and assault in this state, and you can be arrested if you do it. And that's also playing hardball, at least with the whole state behind the sheriff.
Currently, we have a federal government and a Supreme Court that has encroached on the states, or if you look at the founders' interpretation of the Constitution, the federal government has ruined their power with the blessing of the Supreme Court. And we have activists, we talk about activist judges all the time, and certainly the Supreme Court, they're definitely activist judges. They supposedly create law, but I think we also have an activist Congress. They pass laws and wait for the Supreme Court to say, oh no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And they just assume they can. I think it's time for the states to say, no, hey, we have an idea of what this Constitution says, and we are going to pass laws that reflect our interpretation of the Constitution, and and then you guys can figure out how to do that instead of the other way around, where we always have the states on the defense instead of on the offense.
Well, let's keep this in perspective. For 200 years, every time Congress has acted, the states have complained that the federal government is encroaching upon their turf. So we can argue about matters of degree. We can argue about how complex societies become, how industrialized societies become, about the fact we no longer have a frontier. But this is not a new complaint.
No.
So, I mean, my suggestion is, well, if your problem is that the Congress, we the people elect, are violating their oaths, rather than we the people electing a state legislature that will hold the Congress to their oaths very indirectly, why not hold Congress to their oaths? We elect both of them. So we're picking both Congress and the state legislatures. Why not try to make Congress more responsive to the people? And if they're not responsive, let's talk about political reforms and some of the other systemic issues. But my basic point is, why should we elect a state legislature to tell a congressman who we also elect how to do their job when we elect the state legislature to do a different job, which is to fund our schools and to do everything that this Constitution says they need to do and take an oath to do?
Well, it goes back to that issue, like she talked earlier. You have political checks don't always work because you have a systemic problem of repeat players in the Iron Triangle in D.C. Big corporations dominate. They want to dominate regulatory agencies, and they want to dominate Congress. And so what is the check? And I think that Madison and Jefferson both pointed out that the states have this obligation and duty to be that check when there's a failure in the separations of powers, when there's a failure in the political process at the national level. I'm not saying that I'm not going to nullification as the only check. I would love to use politics if we can do it. Problem is in this country is Americans are such slaves to their political parties. You had Tester and Rayburg and Baucus all voting for the NDAA, and yet people tend to vote along party lines rather than voting on lines being Americans. And so, until such time as we can remedy this political problem we have of the domination of corporate control, maybe through term limits, national term limits eventually. Until then, we have to use what we have left. I mean, it seems like all we have left in the face of such gross violations is our states, but they don't do anything.
Yeah, you asked why do we have the state legislature?
I'm sorry, she's been waiting quite some time.
No, I just wanted to go back, and when you were talking about the sheriffs and the power, being able to stand up to the federal government and the SWAT team coming in, I want you to know that we had exactly that situation happen right in our own state several years ago in Powell County. And I had a friend that was able to get a phone call into her county sheriff in Powell County, and he came to their rescue, I'm gonna say. And what happened is that when he went got to their gate, and the gate was locked, and the feds were there, and they said, you can't go in. He said, this is my county, and those are my people, and you open that gate. And this couple really believed.
What was the issue? What were they there for?
It was over, there was a gold mining issue there. There was gold involved. And these people were the owners of the gold mine. So I'll give further information. It's been several years ago.
Okay,
I just wanted you to know that the county sheriff is the supreme authority over any federal agent that comes into this state.
I want to shift topics for a second. We got about 5 minutes left. We can also agree that there are some things that the states are not competent to do. Interstate pollution. If we don't do it on a national level, there's a race to the bottom and we all suffer. And one of the ways that Congress achieves its goals is through the spending power. That is by applying money to problems in ways that either it can directly address them or indirectly address them through the states. And if we go back to the rights of adults, I'm trying to remember the year, but in the 1970s, Congress said, look, we have a drinking problem with young kids. Congress is not in a position to say, here's a law that says, Helena, the speed limit in your city is 25 miles per hour. But they don't have that power. They do have the power to say, Helena, here's $2 million, but if you want that money, you've got to change your speed limit to 25 miles per hour. And that's essentially what happened with the Montana provision with respect to adult rights.
And that's the sleeper issue in the healthcare cases. That's a far more significant, broader constitutional issue as to whether the Congress could expand Medicaid and whether that's coercive of the states. That would be a far more significant decision with ripple effects elsewhere than would any decision on the individual mandate. So it's a very timely question.
Carroll, did you have a comment?
Well, I wanted to talk about what Montanans are doing and can do. If you recall, about 10 years ago, there was a big brouhaha up along the border with Alberta. And the farmers were not happy, and they took their trucks out and they blockaded the port. The governor didn't call them out, they just went. And they expressed what they thought were their problems and what they thought the issues were, and people listened.
So civil disobedience, they blockaded, what did they block?
They just took their trucks and they filled up the highway. There was nobody coming through either way on the port.
And I think that's a great example of highlighting our own individual responsibility and power in our relationship to our federal government. That I, as a citizen of Montana and of the United States, I am protected by both sets of laws and constitutions. I am also bound by both sets of laws and constitutions. I am reluctant to ask my state legislature to be the arbiter of whether or not my federal rights have been violated when I know that I have a relationship with my Congress and I have a relationship with my judicial branch, my federal judicial branch, and my federal executive branch. That decisions about whether or not the federal government has overstepped its authority can be handled through those channels, and I can undertake that as an